I'm Mark Turner, president of the Gilroy Chamber of Commerce, and we are doing our 8th annual legislative summit. And today we have with us Congressman Jimmy Panetta. He represents the 20th Congressional District of California. Congressman Panetta is part of the House Committee on Ways and Means, House Committee on Agriculture, House Committee on Armed Services. He is the Chief Deputy Whip. He's the House Democratic Steering and on the House Democratic Steering and Policy Committee, and also on numerous caucus memberships. Congressman, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. And just let me say, I really enjoy having conversations with you. And I'm not just blowing you smoke so you give me easy questions. I really mean this. You have such a great demeanor and personality for that job that it really is an honor to be here and have this type of discussion that we can have. You make it easy.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, Congressman. I'll make sure my board members all see that and hear what you just said.
Fair enough. I'll say it anytime. Hopefully next time I can say it in person.
That is what we are shooting for. 2022's, we're looking for that to be a more in-person event, and would be honored to have you with us next year as well.
You bet. I'll be there.
Well, let's jump right in. We got a lot to cover, so we'll just kind of go for it. Man, what a year we have had. COVID, of course, being the main topic across the board. So I was interested in knowing from your perspective and where you're at, what are we looking at? What's going on? And I know there's been a number of relief plans that have been passed. And I think that Congress is working on another one. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, no, you bet. It's true. It's true. We've had last 2020. I think people are glad to see it in our rear view mirrors and appreciate what we're doing already in 2021. I mean, but what you look at, though, especially from the federal government aspect of it, is that we really did our part in the strategy that was deployed back then in 2020 of sort of federally funded, state mandated, locally executed. And then actually what we're doing now in 2021 and sort of the wartime effort as well that this administration is employing when it comes to basically battling COVID-19. So once again, back in 2020, I mean, Congress passed 5 major bills equaling $4 trillion, if you can imagine that. And that was just in 2020, that basically, kept the economy afloat, kept the poverty rate flat, and really kind of kept us in that race with this COVID-19 pandemic, to be honest with you. And so it was a good thing in that we saw tremendous amounts of money being injected into the local area. For example, through the CARES Act alone, Gilroy City received $700,000. You received community development block grants of $700,000. Gilroy schools received $15 million. Gavilan College received $7.5 million. And the Paycheck Protection Program, which a lot of businesses took advantage of. Basically, 737 businesses used the PPP, which affected 9,615 jobs just there in Gilroy alone. And so that's just in 2020. And then we went on, and what we did is we passed the American Rescue Plan just a month ago in March, which really basically put another $1.9 trillion into the battle, into helping us of that race between injections and infections right now with the vaccine development, but now making sure there's vaccine deployment as well and the logistics to go with it, which we're seeing in our communities, but also basically the money that's continuing to come into our communities. Gilroy City will receive $11.6 million, Gilroy Schools another $14 million, Gavilan College $9.3 million, and Santa Clara County as a whole will receive $375 million, if you can imagine that. But that's the type of effort that I believe this administration and we in Congress believe that needed to be done, especially to fix COVID, fix the economy, and get ourselves on the road to recovery. And that's what we're seeing. But on top of that, you got to look at this latest bill. It wasn't just about dollars. It was really sort of a transformational bill, if you ask me. And that, yes, we provided the money that was necessary to defeat COVID, as we're seeing with the vaccine deployment, help our state and local governments and our schools and the hospitals and so forth. But also kind of taking a look at the tax code and changing and expanding the child tax credit, expanding the earned income tax credit, which will really do a lot in how, we look forward and basically helping those families that need it the most. And so, people say Joe Biden, in his campaign, he said he was a transitional president. I believe he's a transformational president, and that's the direction that we're going. And I think you're feeling it in the community that because of what we're doing at the federal level, actually making government work for people, people are starting to feel a little more sense of controls with sense of control, the control that they didn't have over the past year. So like I said, it's a little bit more optimistic in 2021 than it has been in 2020. And I'm glad that we're playing our part in Congress.
Well, Congressman, also, as you mentioned, this most recent bill, it's been often referred to as an infrastructure type of bill. Obviously, a very non-traditional definition for infrastructure. How do you address the critics when it comes to that particular definition?
Yeah, look, I think, and you're talking about the American Jobs Plan that the president has introduced and that we're going to be working on these next few months. That is something that, look, this is, for too long, you heard in my last, I've been in Congress 4 years, and all too often you heard people talk about, oh, this is infrastructure week. And then a month later, oh, this is infrastructure week. And then a month later, this is infrastructure week. It was a lot of talk. There really wasn't much action. And you know what? There should have been. Because I can tell you, ever since I got in Congress, like I said, back in 2017, infrastructure is one of the most bipartisan areas that you can think about. And I believe that that's what this president now understands, but also realizes that we've underinvested in our infrastructure for not just the past 4 years, but for the past literally 4 decades, to be honest with you. And that's why, you're seeing the need for it, not just here on the Central Coast, but all across the country. And yes, it is that what people are calling, quote unquote, traditional infrastructure. Of course, we need our roads fixed. We need our bridges repaired. We need investments in our ports and airports and so forth. But also, you have to look outside the box. And I believe that that's what we want to do, in the sense that we want to talk about workforce training. We want to talk about our hospitals. We want to talk about something that our schools, but also something that's needed here on the Central Coast, and that's affordable housing. Making sure we have that. Now, last year, we introduced a bill called HR 2 that had in it $100 billion for affordable housing. Well, that's the type of investment that the American Jobs Plan is going to have as well, because we need that thinking when it comes to infrastructure, that yes, it's about getting to work, but it's also about when, other resources necessary to go to work. Not just transportation, but also how you live your life and how your family lives its life, to making sure that basically they have the resources necessary to continue thriving in our society. And so, yes, it's about roads and bridges and so forth, but it's also about jobs. It's about child tax credits. It's about child care. It's about hospitals. It's about adult care. It's about everything else in our lives that we've underfunded and underinvested in. And I look forward to being a part of it, especially on the Ways and Means Committee, coming up with this bill that we're going to be doing over these next few months.
Well, I imagine it'll be quite a conversation and quite a debate over these next few months as well, with regards to, again, as I said, the traditional definition, and as you describe it, should be interesting to watch from a political junkie perspective, that's for sure.
It is, but also know that, look, you have that bill, but also we still have our appropriations process that we have been doing and will continue to do. And I just put in we had our priority list on certain appropriations, and I just put in my request for, $10 million to upgrade Route 25 in San Benito County. And then also that Santa Teresa extension there at the 101-25 interchange request for $5 million to make sure that's upgraded as well. So there's other avenues that we're working on when it comes to our infrastructure that is so needed at this point.
Yeah, that'll be a great help for our community in this area here. Well, as you mentioned, Gilroy, in your previous comments, I mean, Gilroy has the distinct position of being sort of as an agricultural community and as part of Silicon Valley. And with your position on the House Agricultural Committee, what are you seeing and or working on in the area of biotechnology, horticulture, and research?
Yeah, you bet. Obviously, what we have here. We have specialty crops, and there's a reason why we have so many appellations, from Gilroy being the garlic capital, to the salad bowl of the world, to the strawberry bowl of the world, to the artichoke capital of the world, because we got them all. But obviously it's very unique when it comes to specialty crops. It's definitely not like the corn or the soy or the wheat that you see in other parts of the country. We know what we have here and how lucky we are that we have it here. But it takes a few things. A lot of it comes down to agricultural research. And being on the Ag Committee, we're going to continue to do what we did in the 2018 Farm Bill and make sure that there's funding there for especially crop research initiatives, the organic research and extension initiative for organic crops, but also looking at ways that we can go beyond. Because obviously one of the biggest issues, you talk to anybody around here, they'll tell you, no, look, we got to watch out for water, especially with the drought that we've experienced this past summer. We're going to experience coming up here this past winter, and we're going to experience coming up this summer. So we got to watch our water. But I'll tell you, people still say the number one issue around here is immigration. And so with basically, when you talk about research and development, you also want to talk about mechanization. Now, yes, we got like I said, the salad bowl, but we're also in the shadow of Silicon Valley, at least we are, that on the Central Coast. And we got to make sure that we help them come up with ways and get involved, and through public-private partnerships and through investments to make sure that we start to mechanize, not to replace labor. Okay, let's make that clear, but to replace the lack of labor that everybody in agriculture is experiencing at this time. So that's another big part of it. And we got certain wording in the 2018 Farm Bill, and we want to expand on that in the next Farm Bill in 2023. And it's also making sure that the laborers and employees and the farm workers that we do have are taken care of, especially with COVID-19, especially with the wildfires that we had. And so we made sure to up the amount of money that was coming in to our ag producers so that they had enough resources to care for those farm workers who continue to come to work today, continue to help us put food on our table, continue to contribute to our food security here, not just here on the Central Coast, but throughout our country, and realizing how important they are. So we continue to do that. And then obviously, it's making sure that, like I said, they're not just protected with masks, but also with vaccines. And that's why I'm proud to say and proud to see the sort of, I don't want to call them mass vaccine sites, but the mini mass vaccine sites that we're doing in regards to making sure that we're funding these federally qualified health clinics. They're coordinating with our producers and basically bringing the vaccines to one site, bringing the employees, the farm workers to that same site, and basically having our own mass vac sites. So it's actually a good way to basically continue protecting those who continue to contribute so much to our agriculture, to our economy, and to our communities, and that's our farm workers as well.
Yeah, we're going to jump into immigration here in just one second, but I did want to talk, as we're talking about technology and agriculture, it'd be great to pull together an ag high-tech summit, and wonder if we might be able to get you to be a part of that, and maybe even Congresswoman Zolofgren to join us, as she really represents a large part of Silicon Valley, you representing a large part of agriculture. It might be good to bring these two communities together and really talk about how technology can better serve the agricultural community.
Completely agree with you. I know that there are these few summits. Funny, there were a lot of summits early on about ag tech. There was kind of the hot topic and where it was going. But I think what people are realizing is it's damn difficult to find a machine that can replace the human discernment on what is, for example, an aesthetically pleasing, ripe, and safe and sound strawberry, if you know what I mean. And right. It's very difficult technology. It's a very difficult quality to replace. And so I think people are finding it a lot harder than it actually thought it would be, but that shouldn't stop us from continuing to invest, continuing to collaborate with the public-private partnerships going forward. So look forward to being a part of that, you bet.
Absolutely. We'll give you more information as we get that pulled together. But let's jump into immigration. As you had touched on that, there really is a lot of challenges in the area of immigration. You mentioned some with regard to agriculture. Obviously, when we think of immigration issues today, we can't help but to focus on what's happening at the border, and anybody can use whatever word they want to describe that situation, but it is a challenge for sure. From your perspective, what is the root cause of the challenges we're facing at the border, and how do we go about addressing those challenges?
Yeah, look, I think there's, when you say immigration, unfortunately, you just can't look at it in a vacuum. And so obviously, let me back up before I get to the border. Obviously, we've been doing an extensive amount of work on immigration reform because our immigration system is broken. Let's make that clear. The last time reasonable, sensible immigration reform was passed was back in 1986, thanks to President Ronald Reagan, who passed that, but nothing's been done since then. And so we're seeing a number of issues at this point basically kind of percolate up and have been neglected, to be honest with you. We got close back in 2013 with Senate Bill 744, a comprehensive immigration bill. but it's sort of been piecemealed going forward, and even then unsuccessful with those efforts. But let me tell you, it's not to say that we're not trying. And I gotta give a huge shout out to my colleague and maybe some of your members, Congresswoman, Congress member, and that's Zoe Lofgren. She did an excellent job in focusing on the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. And we were at that, I was part of those discussions in which she basically came up with legislation. We worked with farmers and farm workers, Democrats and Republicans for about 8 to 9 months, just grinding out this legislation that provided an earned pathway of citizenship to those who worked in ag, who will continue to work in ag, as well as a revamping of the visa process to make it easier to get our H-2A workers here as well. An excellent bill that got the most Republican votes on an immigration bill out of the House of Representatives, not just last term. Nothing was done on the Senate last term, but now this term too, we passed it with 30 Republican votes, and hopefully the Senate can do something with that, especially a well thought out, formulated piece of legislation like that. We also passed the Dream and the Promise Act to help our Dreamers and our TPS recipients, but we need to do something about the border as well. I've been to the border twice in the last month. I've been to the HHS facilities, but I've also been to the Customs and Border Patrol facilities that you see the pictures of, that crowding. And let me tell you, it's exactly like you see in the pictures. And we want to get these unaccompanied children out of the CBP facilities as soon as possible, move them on to the HHS facilities. So yes, every time I go to the border, and I've been 5 times total now in my time in Congress, I've come away with the same conclusion. You need more resources to deal with that issue, that short-term issue at the border, but we also need to think long-term and go beyond the border and go to those Northern Triangle countries and find out, like you said, what the heck are the root causes? What's pushing these families, these children out of those countries to our borders to try to come here and try to have a better life? And so it's a combination of things, of not just immigration reform with our laws here and dealing with those who are undocumented here, but also, yes, focusing on the border, providing more border patrol, more security from infrastructure to technology and so forth, but also then going beyond the border and going into those Northern Triangle countries and making sure that we understand what the heck's going on there, from dealing with the effects of climate change to dealing with the effects of gang violence to dealing with the effects of corruption in their governments as well. And what can we do as the leader of the free world? What can we do as a leader of this hemisphere to ensure that we help them, and that when we do provide resources, it's not just giving money to the governments that can be very corrupt, but what other avenues there are to help the people are to make sure that they stay in those countries and continue to basically thrive in those countries rather than being pushed out of those countries. So it's you know, in my limited time in Congress, I can tell you, and I wouldn't be surprised if Zoe said the same thing, but in my limited time in Congress, the most politically complicated and policy complex issue is immigration, for a number of reasons, the obvious reasons that we're talking about. But it's something that we can't just throw up our hands. We have to continue to work on them. And I'm lucky that we have partners, that I have a partner like Zoe Lofgren, who chairs the Immigration Subcommittee on the Judiciary Committee, who's willing to do that. So I look forward to continuing to work with her to solve this problem. Yeah,
because as you said, this goes back many, many years, and even administrations that were both Republican and Democrat who have had challenges in this area. Yeah. So it's very complex, as you said. And when we start to deal with these other countries who have a different mindset about the way things are being run in their country, how do you influence? What do you do in order to end corruption in somebody else's country? That seems to be the challenge.
It is. It really is. But, you know, Zoe Lofgren had an amazing bill that dealt specifically with the Northern Triangle and how we were able to inject reasonable resources into those triangle, using the kind of go around the corrupt governments, focusing on nonprofits and things of that nature. But like I said, it was a bill that unfortunately was part of immigration, and therefore, we had a hard time with it in Congress. But I think now people understand the need, based on what is happening, that this is an issue that is, and it's not just about this administration. People have been coming here for a long time, since 1986, and coming to our borders, be it the pull of our economy or the push out of their countries because of the violence and the effects of climate change, like we talked about. So something needs to be done. And like I said, I believe that this administration understands that. And I appreciate that they appointed Vice President Harris as the point person on this, someone who's from California, who understands, who I worked with in the Alameda County DA's office. But resources need to be addressed and focused on this issue sooner rather than later, is my opinion.
Now, you mentioned Vice President Harris, and of course, she has now been put in charge of the border situation there. What has she been doing? I know that, again, there is cries for her to visit the border, to come up with a plan. Based on what you know, what is she actually working on in order to help address the problems there?
Oh, look, I am not privy to the details of her efforts, and it's not like she has briefed Congress on a specific plan. And I can just tell you what's an open source in the sense that, they're starting to make certain appointments to certain key positions, which, like I said, it needs to be done sooner rather than later. I do believe she's traveling to the Northern Triangle coming up here at a time. But like I said, right now, more resources need to be put at the border. Get, if I understand, I think many people in this area understand the moral decision to accept unaccompanied children, but we need to have the resources to accept them. And we need to catch up based on the lack of resources that the last administration put at the border. We need to catch up and make sure that more resources are put at the border to basically deal with the deluge of people that were coming in here in a orderly, in an efficient, and yes, in a compassionate manner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so true. It is becoming an overwhelming problem to have to address. So appreciate your comments on that. Of course, when we think about immigration, obviously housing becomes an equal concern. We have a growing crisis in California with regards to both housing and homelessness. Depending on the report you read, California houses or is home to 27 to 50% of the nation's homeless population. And you could break that down and come up with 7 or 8 categories, never really being able to address all of them the same way. From your perspective, what is the greatest challenge we face with regards to our homeless population, and how do we go about addressing some of those issues? I know you can't just in this quick few minutes just say, well, here's the answer. It's more complex than that, I know.
We wish we could, but I think what makes this a difficult issue is that it started off, obviously housing and homelessness is a very local issue. And then you started to see the state get involved, obviously with the passage of Prop 63, and basically using the mental health issues, taking into account paying for the mental health issues, and then taking a part of that 1% and putting into housing as well. And so you're seeing the state get involved. And now basically, because you're seeing it, like you said, not just in California, but from Seattle to San Diego is pretty much what it amounts to. This is an all hands on deck issue, a local issue, a state issue, a federal government issue. And so what do we do best? And that's basically provide the funding. When I say we, I'm saying the federal government. And so we need to make sure that the funding is there so that the state and the local governments have the resources necessary to deal with that issue. That really is a local issue, is what it comes down to. And so in my limited time, I've continued to put close to $100 million in grants for affordable housing and homeless programs into the Central Coast. And a lot of those programs most of them consist of community development block grants, home grants, HUD-BASH grants, continuum of care grants for homelessness. But it's also coming up with ways that we can think about rehabilitation of housing projects and also development of affordable housing projects. And so that's basically, how do we get private investors involved? Tax credits, making sure that we have the 4% tax credits for rehabilitation, the 9% tax credits for actual development of affordable housing. But once again, it's not just about what we can do, it's making sure that the locals, there's not the NIMBYism, there's not the local standards and regulations that they want to put up to prevent that from happening. Like I said, this isn't all hands on deck. No matter how much money we throw at the problem, you got to make sure that the locals and the local governments are on board as well, and that they have to step up. They have to allow for this affordable housing. They have to allow for these homeless programs as well in order to deal with it. So like I said, it's something that we have been talking about. We have been putting forward legislation and dealing with not just making sure there's enough money there in these types of grants, which let me tell you, in the COVID relief packages, there were a bit large amounts of money for that, especially dealing with rent relief as well. but also going forward into infrastructure. And I think what we understand now is that when you're thinking about infrastructure, like I talked about, affordable housing is a cornerstone of that. And so you're going to see a major investment when it comes to affordable housing in this next American Jobs Plan package, which I think is so needed on the Central Coast. So, like I said, we can do all we want when it comes to funding these types of affordable housing programs and homeless programs. It takes everybody being involved at the state and at the local level as well to make sure that funding goes to the resources and those resources are actually used to develop affordable housing.
Two of probably the largest categories that we look at when we talk about homelessness is in the area of the criminal element, which quite frankly, they need to go back to jail. It's my opinion. And the other is the mentally ill or the mentally incapable. And I think when we look at that, it's almost incompassionate when you think about it from that level to allow them to continue to live on the street, when in fact, if we could get the state and federal government to work together, if there's funding being provided, and we know at the state level, billions of dollars are being wasted on some of these agencies that provide continuums of care, those monies could go toward building compassionate care units. Back in the day, they were called state hospitals, but they don't have to be that same sort of, when you think of a state hospital, a different image comes to mind. But compassionate care is much different, and living on the street is not compassionate care. How do we get the state and federal government talking at that level? What would that take?
Oh, look, man, I wish we know. I wish we could figure this one out.
By the way, did I tell you this is Stump the Congressman hour?
Yeah. No, look, I wish we could figure this one out, Mark. Like I said, I mean, obviously it takes more collaboration. We're focused on our part at the federal government level to make sure that there's enough funding there for those types of resources. Look, you can talk about it all you want, but you got to turn your words into deeds. And that's what we've been doing in Congress, making sure that funding is there through the number of grant programs that I talked about. But you got to make sure that the local governments understand that this is an issue. You got to make sure that those who live in these local governments understand that they got to play their part too. And realizing that affordable housing is not just something that affects another town, and that you can't just, basically remove that out of your community. Basically, affordable housing is needed throughout the Central Coast. I mean, when you have look, man, the average cost of a house in Santa Cruz County, close to $1 million, a single family home. Give me a break. Yet we expect so many people to work here in the service industry, in the hospitality industry, in the agricultural industry. How do you expect them to live here? Therefore, we have to have other ways in which we can provide them with reasonable, affordable housing so that we can continue to be the economic, our number 1 and 2 industry, hospitality and agriculture, can continue to thrive. So it's all interconnected, not just, with state and federal, but obviously with industry and the local government. So it's making people understand that it's a lot more than just having an affordable housing development in your backyard. It's making sure that basically that development will allow people to live there, allow people to work, allow people to serve you, and allow you to continue with your life as well.
Yeah, great point. I appreciate that. As we move into our last topic here, I wanted to get into, again, rather hot topic, law enforcement reform. As we look at that and all that's going on across the country, what do you see as the major issues when it comes to law enforcement reform?
Well, look, I think obviously, I believe, let me just make one thing clear. I believe our criminal justice system is the best in the world. Okay. Now, look, I got a little bias there in the sense that I was a prosecutor for 20 years, and I saw what can take place when you have human beings involved in our process. And that basically, as a young DA starting off in Alameda County, I'll never forget the question that I got before I took the job, and that was, what would you do if you had somebody who was 90% guilty? And my response was, well, I thought you would go forward and let the wheels of justice take place. And he said, no. He said, in this office, you got to know that he's 100% guilty before you do anything. And that really taught me early on. It's about ethics. It's about principles. It's about, we always wear the white hat. And therefore, no matter what type of position you have in law enforcement, you got to make sure there's good people in law enforcement. at this point. And therefore, it gets down to obviously hiring practices. It gets down to training practices as well. And that's why we in Congress passed the Justice in Policing Act, to make sure that we root out the bad police officers, the bad apples, and we keep them out through a database collection, and also make sure that there's ways to hold them accountable at this point as well. So the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act is what I would look to as a model as to what other local agencies can do. But as you know, there are 18,000 police departments in the country, okay? 800,000 police officers in the country. And so we need to lead through an example. And that's why I hope right now there's discussions going on. We passed the Justice in Policing Act in Congress. The Senate is in negotiations right now with one of our leaders, Karen Bass, and as well as a bipartisan caucus that I'm involved in, the Problem Solvers Group, Democrats and Republicans, who are basically working with Tim Scott of South Carolina and Cory Booker of New Jersey, the two senators, Democrat and Republican, to try to come up with a compromise when it comes to the Justice in Policing Act. And I think we're very close at this point. But it takes those types of efforts. Now, will it solve it overnight? No, but it's a first step, and it's a model that other police departments can emulate going forward, and we can incentivize them to make sure that they have the proper training to focus on de-escalation rather than escalation of force. Look, it's not a defunding police. That's not how you're going to solve this. But it's also looking at how we kind of rethink our policing. And what I mean by that is, I work with a hell of a lot of good police officers who are there to do their job of get bad guys off the streets. But we demand way too much from our police officers. We expect them to deal with addiction. We expect them to get the cats out of the trees. We expect them to deal with homelessness. We expect them to deal with mental health issues as well. And therefore, how can we take those responsibilities and put them into other components in our government and let them deal with those issues, and make sure that the officers who can focus on getting bad guys off the street, let them do their job, have another way to have other people in our government focus on the issues that I talked about. So it's that type of thinking outside the box that we need to do in order to address the many issues that we're thinking about at this point. But look, what it comes down to is, the criminal justice system, as many mistakes as we see on the TV, there are times when it works, like last week with the conviction of Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd. So when people come in and say, oh, the criminal justice system is broken, okay, yeah, there are parts that need improvement, you bet. But it's the best system we have. And it's just like our country in the sense that, yeah, you can sit there and pick apart the areas that need improvement, but our democracy isn't the best. Our democracy is the best, but it's the best that always needs improvement. We always need to continue to work at forming the more perfect union. We always need to continue improving one of the cornerstones of our democracy, and that's our criminal justice system. And that's what I hope to do with the Justice in Policing Act.
Let me ask you, how do we get to where we need to go without completely broad brushing every cop as a racist? It really is unfair. You had mentioned 800,000 police officers. The fact is, most all of them are good cops. And it only takes a few bad apples to get a bad name across the board. And it really is, from my perspective, it's an unfair, I think, labeling of all of our police officers as being racist or systemically racist. That really isn't true. And I'm concerned about this sort of discussion, the debate that occurs when we sort of look at every police officer as being bad. How do we get to where we need to go without categorizing every cop as a bad cop?
Well, look, I think there, it's about conversation. It's about discussion. And I think what you realize is that, you can't simplify the issue by saying that all people who work in the criminal justice system are racist, okay? You do that, you're gonna take away from the conversation, you're gonna stop the conversation, because that's just not true. However, it doesn't mean that the system operates in a racially biased manner, because it can. And you look at the data and it demonstrates that unfortunately certain populations of color are disaffected, are affected more by our criminal justice system than other populations. And that's where you need to have those types of conversations to lay out the data and look at the evidence in order to see then what areas can we improve upon. So yeah, you're right. It's a conversation stopper when you sit there and paint everybody as a racist just because they work in the criminal justice system. You know that. I guarantee you everybody listening to or watching this video knows that as well. Are there bad apples? Of course they're bad apples, and we need to work to root them out of the system just like any line of work, okay? And that's what the Justice in Policing Act does. But at the same time, you have to be able to have that conversation. You have to be able to look at the data, look at the evidence, and have reasonable evidentiary-based rather than emotional-based type conversation, especially over this issue, which can get emotional very quick. And you understand why, considering what we're seeing on TV, considering the crimes that we are seeing through the use of body cams. But at this point, we have to realize that it starts with having a reasonable, sensible, evidentiary-based conversation about the system.
There's a bill, I think, if I'm not mistaken, going through Congress or coming to Congress, something to do with the personal immunity or something to the effect of qualified immunity, I believe is what it's called.
That's the Justice in Policing Act.
Okay, that again, how do you see that impacting the ability for local law enforcement agencies to recruit or even to maintain or hold on to their police officers if suddenly they feel like I can be sued over every little thing that comes up? What's the answer to that?
A great question. This is exactly where the negotiations are going on right now between Tim Scott, Cory Booker, and the Problem Solvers and Karen Bass, in the sense that they're looking at ways to ensure that officers are held accountable for violating someone's constitutional rights or committing a crime, but also, looking at ways to not hold the individual officer accountable, looking at ways to hold the police department accountable for the lack of training that they have as well. So this is an ongoing discussion when it comes to quote unquote qualified immunity and what ways we can ensure that, you're right, we need to make sure that we continue to have good officers being hired, and like I said, quality people, quality individuals being hired so that it doesn't come to that point. But trust me, when it comes down to it, if there is an officer who commits a crime or if there's an officer who violates someone's constitutional rights, there should be a way to hold them accountable either individually or through the police department. But it's got to be clear that those are the circumstances that basically you do that.
Yeah, again, I think it'll be another great discussion to keep an eye on.
Yeah, no, and trust me, they're getting close and they're having meaningful, substantial, reasonable conversations that is based on the evidence, not the emotions. And so it's good to see that that's developing at this point. Outstanding.
Congressman, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it. These are great topics to have a conversation about, and really appreciate you being with us today.
Of course. Thanks, Mark. Great seeing you virtually. And boy, do I look forward to seeing you and talking to you in person.
Look forward to it as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.